When a trained police dog wouldn't stop barking at the school principal, Counselor Rachel Morgan knew something was wrong. Her investigation uncovered a deadly drug operation using students as test subjects. Subscribe now and comment where you're watching from. Discover how one woman and a loyal German Shepherd exposed the conspiracy powerful people would kill to protect. The March sun bathed St. Michael's Academy in golden light, the kind of perfect Midwestern morning that made the red brick buildings glow like embers against the awakening landscape. Located in the heart of Millfield, Illinois, population 8,742, the school had stood as a cornerstone of community pride since 1937. Its manicured courtyard buzzed with the familiar symphony of students arriving, their voices mingling with birdsong and the distant church bells from St. Paul's across town. Rachel Morgan adjusted her navy blazer as she crossed the parking lot, her sensible heels clicking against the pavement. At 45, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had rebuilt their life from scratch. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, a few determined silver strands framing a face marked by intelligence and something harder to define, a wariness that never quite left her amber eyes. "Morning, Mrs. Morgan," called out the groundskeeper, tipping his worn baseball cap. Rachel smiled and waved, still adjusting to small-town friendliness after 15 years in Chicago's public school system. 3 months into her position as St. Michael's new counselor, she remained an outsider, the city woman, as she'd overheard someone call her in the teacher's lounge. The sudden eruption of frantic barking cut through the morning calm. Rachel turned toward the commotion near the administration building's entrance. A magnificent German Shepherd, his golden coat gleaming in the sunlight, stood rigid and alert, teeth bared at the distinguished man in the charcoal suit descending the steps. "Max, enough!" A thin, elderly woman in a cafeteria uniform hurried across the courtyard, her weathered hands reaching for the dog's collar. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Thompson. I don't know what's gotten into him." Principal Edward Thompson adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses, his silver mustache twitching with evident displeasure. "Mrs. Jenkins, I've tolerated your companion on school grounds as a courtesy, but if he cannot behave appropriately, he's never done this before," Mrs. Jenkins insisted, her voice trembling. "Not in 8 years, sir." Rachel watched the scene unfold, her counselor's instincts humming. Max wasn't exhibiting random aggression. His posture was focused, intentional, almost like, "He looks like he's alerting to something," Rachel said, approaching the group. "I worked with therapy animals in Chicago. This isn't typical aggression." Principal Thompson's steely blue eyes flicked toward her, his expression cooling. "Mrs. Morgan, I appreciate your urban expertise, but this is a simple discipline issue with a pet that doesn't belong on school property." "He's not just a pet," Mrs. Jenkins said quietly, stroking Max's head as he continued to stare at the principal. "He was my son's service animal." Thompson checked his watch, an expensive timepiece that seemed at odds with an educator's salary. "We'll discuss this later. The board meeting starts in 10 minutes. He reached into his pocket, swallowed a small pill discreetly, then strode toward the parking lot. The dog's barking subsided as Thompson disappeared into his black Cadillac, but his amber eyes remained fixed on the vehicle until it turned the corner. "I'm sorry about that," Rachel said, extending her hand to Mrs. Jenkins. "I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm Rachel Morgan, the new counselor." The older woman's grip was surprisingly firm. Elaine Jenkins, 38 years in that cafeteria kitchen. Her faded blue eyes held Rachel's gaze. "And Max here doesn't make mistakes about people." "What exactly was your son's line of work, Mrs. Jenkins?" Rachel asked, noting how the woman's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on the leash. A shadow crossed the woman's face. "Law enforcement. Drug detection unit." She patted Max's head. This boy was trained by the best. Rachel felt a chill despite the warm morning. "And your son?" Mrs. Jenkins looked away. "God rest his soul. Been 5 years now." She straightened her cafeteria uniform. "Max is all I have left of David. That's why Mr. Thompson lets him stay in my office during shifts." As the first bell rang, students streamed toward the building entrance. Rachel watched Principal Thompson's Cadillac disappear down Elm Street, Max's unusual behavior replaying in her mind. "Mrs. Jenkins," she said carefully, "has Max ever reacted that way to the principal before?" The elderly woman's weathered face hardened. "No, ma'am. And that's what worries me." Rachel's office occupied the smallest corner of St. Michael's administrative wing, a converted storage closet with just enough space for a desk, 2 chairs, and a bookshelf stuffed with psychology texts and student resources. The walls were painted institutional beige, adorned only by her counseling license and a single framed photo of Lake Michigan at sunset. The cramped space bothered her Chicago colleagues during their rare visits, but Rachel found comfort in its limitations. Smaller rooms meant fewer shadows, fewer places for secrets to hide. Sitting at her desk, she pulled up Principal Thompson's personnel file on her computer. Edward Thompson, 62. Bachelor's in Education from Northwestern, Master's in Educational Leadership from University of Illinois. 27 years at St. Michael's, the last 15 as principal. Widowed, no children. Impeccable performance reviews. Pillar of the community. So why would a highly trained detection dog alert to him? A knock interrupted her thoughts. Alice Winters, the school secretary, peered around the door frame, her round face pinched with disapproval. "Mr. Thompson would like to see you," she said, voice clipped. Immediately, the principal's office was everything Rachel's wasn't: spacious, with polished oak furniture, leather chairs, and walls lined with awards and photographs documenting decades of St. Michael's achievements. Thompson sat behind his massive desk, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Close the door, please," he said, not looking up from the file before him. Once Rachel complied, he removed his glasses, revealing deep creases around his eyes. "Mrs. Morgan, I understand you're still acclimating to our community." "I'm adjusting well, thank you," Rachel replied, choosing to stand rather than take the offered chair. A small power move she'd learned during her years counseling troubled teens. Thompson smiled thinly. "Then perhaps you're unaware of how things work in Millfield. We value harmony here. Stability." He placed his palms flat on the desk. "This morning's incident with Mrs. Jenkins' dog created unnecessary disruption." "The dog seemed to be responding to something specific," Rachel said. "Given his training background, Mrs. Jenkins is an elderly woman with an emotional attachment to her late son's pet," Thompson interrupted. "The animal is untrained and increasingly senile. I've allowed its presence as a kindness, nothing more." Rachel felt her professional mask slipping. "With all due respect, sir, German Shepherds trained for detection work don't just alert randomly." Max was responding to something. Thompson's expression hardened. "Are you implying something, Mrs. Morgan?" "Not at all. I'm simply making an observation based on my experience." He leaned back, his chair creaking. "Your experience in Chicago ended rather abruptly, did it not?" The comment landed like a slap. Rachel's past wasn't secret, but she hadn't expected it to surface so quickly in Millfield. "My record as a counselor speaks for itself," she said evenly, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Indeed." Thompson replaced his glasses. "Your references were adequate, though I understand your testimony in the Davidson case proved problematic for your former district." Rachel's hands curled into fists at her sides. "I reported what I observed, as was my legal and ethical obligation. And yet the charges were dropped, the district sued, and you found yourself seeking employment elsewhere." Thompson sighed heavily. "We don't need that kind of disruption at St. Michael's, Mrs. Morgan. We're a family here." "Families should protect their vulnerable members," Rachel countered, thinking of the students she'd already identified as needing additional support, the ones showing signs of neglect, abuse, or simply falling through institutional cracks. Thompson's smile never reached his eyes. "Precisely my point. Now, I suggest you focus on your counseling duties and leave school security matters to administration." He reached into his pocket, extracting a pill bottle. "Excuse me. Heart condition." Rachel watched as he swallowed 2 small white tablets with water from a crystal tumbler. The medication didn't look like any heart medication she recognized from her healthcare training. "Is there anything else, sir?" "Just one thing." Thompson's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Mrs. Jenkins has worked here longer than almost anyone. The students adore her. It would be unfortunate if her remaining years here were complicated by unnecessary concerns." The threat, though veiled, was unmistakable. Rachel nodded curtly and turned to leave. "Mrs. Morgan?" Thompson called as her hand touched the doorknob. "Welcome to St. Michael's. I'm sure you'll find your place here." Walking back to her office, Rachel passed the school's trophy case, its glass reflecting her troubled expression. Chicago had taught her to trust her instincts. And right now, every instinct screamed that something was deeply wrong beneath St. Michael's polished surface. In the cafeteria during lunch period, Rachel spotted Mrs. Jenkins serving mashed potatoes to a line of chattering students. Max lay in the corner, his alert eyes tracking every movement in the room. When the elderly woman saw Rachel, she gave an almost imperceptible nod toward the kitchen door. 5 minutes later, they stood between industrial refrigerators, voices lowered beneath the clatter of dishes and the hum of massive freezers. "He threatened you, didn't he?" Mrs. Jenkins asked without preamble. Rachel hesitated. "He expressed concerns about disruptions." Mrs. Jenkins snorted. "Edward Thompson doesn't express concerns. He issues warnings." She glanced toward the swinging doors. "Max was my son's partner for 4 years. That dog can detect things most humans can't even imagine." "What happened to your son, Mrs. Jenkins?" Rachel asked gently. The older woman's eyes clouded. "Official report says accidental drowning. David never drank a drop in his life, but somehow he ended up in Miller's Lake with a blood alcohol level 3 times the legal limit." Her voice hardened. 2 weeks after he started investigating a new distribution network moving through Midwestern schools. April arrived with drenching rains that transformed St. Michael's meticulous grounds into a patchwork of puddles and mud. Rachel stood at her office window, watching students splash through the courtyard, their colorful umbrellas bobbing like buoys in a storm. It had been 3 weeks since her confrontation with Thompson. 3 weeks of careful observation and meticulously documented notes hidden in a password-protected file labeled Student Intervention Strategies. A soft knock pulled her attention from the window. 17-year-old Zach Martinez stood in her doorway, rainwater dripping from his varsity jacket onto the worn carpet. "Got a minute, Mrs. M?" he asked, his usual confidence absent from his voice. "Always, Zach. Come in." Rachel gestured to the chair across from her desk. "How's the science competition prep going?" Zach had been one of her first student connections, a brilliant chemistry student with a troubled home life who'd initially resisted her attempts at support. They'd reached an understanding over weekly chess games that served as cover for their counseling sessions. "That's kind of what I wanted to talk about." He glanced nervously at the door before closing it. "Something weird happened in advanced chem yesterday." Rachel kept her expression neutral despite her quickening pulse. "Weird how?" "We got this new shipment of lab supplies. Big boxes with these special seals, not the usual stuff from Fisher Scientific." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. When Mr. Peterson opened them, he made everybody stand back. Then he and Principal Thompson took some of the containers to that old lab nobody uses in the East Wing. The restricted lab? Rachel had noticed the padlocked room during her orientation tour. Thompson had dismissed it as outdated equipment storage. "Yeah, but here's the thing." Zach pulled out his phone, checking to ensure the door remained closed. "I volunteer in the front office during 4th period, right? I was filing purchase orders yesterday and saw the shipping manifest for those supplies. They weren't listed anywhere in the school budget or curriculum materials." Rachel fought to maintain her professional demeanor. Could they be donations from a university or corporate partner? "That's what I thought," but he hesitated again, then pushed his phone across the desk. "I took a picture of the manifest before Mrs. Winters caught me. Look at the sender." The image showed a shipping label from Midwest Educational Pharmaceuticals, a company Rachel had never heard of despite her years in the educational system. "The weird part is there's no such company," Zach continued. "I checked. Their address is a vacant lot in Indianapolis. And those weren't normal lab chemicals, Mrs. M. I know my way around a chem lab. Those were pharmaceutical precursors, the kind that require DEA clearance to purchase." Rachel felt a chill run through her that had nothing to do with April's dampness. "Zach, this is serious. Have you told anyone else about this?" The boy shook his head. "Just you. But there's more. After everyone left, I doubled back to get my calculator. Max was there with Mrs. Jenkins. She was cleaning up, and he went crazy when she walked past those boxes. Like, full-on alert mode. Just like with Thompson, Rachel thought. The pieces were beginning to align. "Mrs. M, my dad's been clean for 2 years." Zach's voice cracked slightly. "I know what drug manufacturing operations look like. The equipment, the precursors, the security, it's all there." Rachel reached across the desk, squeezing his hand. "I need you to do something for me, Zach. Stay away from that lab. Don't ask questions, Don't take any more pictures. Focus on your classes and let me handle this. But promise me, she insisted. If what you're suggesting is happening, it's dangerous. Your safety comes first. After Zach left, Rachel locked her door and pulled out her personal laptop. Never connected to the school's network. She'd been mapping patterns since that first day with Max. Thompson's unexplained absences, always coinciding with the monthly deliveries. The mysterious heart medication he took multiple times daily. The restricted lab that remained perpetually locked except to the principal and select faculty. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Jenkins. Kitchen. After hours. Bring notebook. The school cafeteria after dismissal was eerily quiet, its industrial-sized appliances cooling with occasional metallic pings. Mrs. Jenkins sat at a corner table, her cafeteria uniform exchanged for jeans and a faded flannel shirt that hung loosely on her thin frame. Max lay at her feet, his ears perking up as Rachel approached. You should be careful who you trust here, Mrs. Jenkins said without preamble. Walls have ears at St. Michael's. I think I'm starting to understand that, Rachel replied, sliding into the seat across from her. One of my students noticed something concerning about a recent delivery. Mrs. Jenkins nodded grimly. The monthly special. Always comes on the third Wednesday. Always goes straight to the East Wing. She pulled a worn envelope from her pocket and slid it across the table. These were David's notes. He was tracking a new synthetic compound moving through Midwestern schools. Started in Chicago, spread to smaller communities. Disguised as supplements, energy drinks, even candy. Rachel opened the envelope, finding pages of handwritten observations, chemical formulas, and locations, most centered around educational institutions. Your son believed schools were distribution points? Not just distribution. Mrs. Jenkins' voice hardened. Production. Think about it. Schools have labs, chemicals, legitimate reasons to receive shipments of precursors. Who questions a high school receiving scientific supplies? Perfect cover. Rachel studied the notes, her blood running cold as she recognized locations, dates, and names. One in particular jumped out at her. Edward Thompson, formerly Edward Thomason, Ph.D. in Organic Chemistry, University of Michigan, 1985. Thompson isn't an educator, Rachel whispered. He's a chemist. Mrs. Jenkins' eyes glistened with unshed tears. David figured it out 3 weeks before he died. Thompson disappeared from the academic world after a scandal at Michigan. Falsified research, allegations of illegal synthesis. He resurfaced 5 years later with a new name, new credentials. That's why Max reacts to him, Rachel realized. The dog smells the chemicals on him. David trained that dog himself. Max can detect the specific compound they're making, something David called clarity. Enhancement drug marketed to students. Boosts focus, memory, cognitive performance. Highly addictive with long-term neurological damage. The elderly woman's hands trembled slightly. They're using our children as lab rats, Mrs. Morgan. And anyone who gets close to the truth ends up silenced. Rachel closed the folder, her counselor's instinct to help now warring with her survival instinct. We need evidence. Hard proof before we can go to authorities. That's what David said. Mrs. Jenkins' voice cracked. The night before they found him in that lake. The science department's monthly meeting adjourned at precisely 4:15 p.m., faculty members filing out of the conference room with the weary expressions common to educators in late April. Rachel lingered near the water fountain, pretending to check her phone while waiting for her target to emerge. Melissa Chun exited last, arms laden with textbooks and lab reports. Dark circles beneath her eyes betraying the exhaustion of her first month at St. Michael's. At 32, she was the newest addition to the science faculty, a former pharmaceutical researcher with a PhD from MIT who'd abruptly changed careers to teach high school chemistry. Her arrival in Millfield had sparked the usual small-town gossip. Why would someone with her credentials choose St. Michael's over research or university positions? Dr. Chun, Rachel approached as the younger woman juggled her materials. Need a hand with those? Melissa looked up, surprise flickering across her face. Mrs. Morgan, right? The counselor. Her voice carried a slight accent that hinted at her Taiwanese heritage. Thanks, but I've got it. Just heading to my classroom to grade these lab reports. Mind if I walk with you? I've been meaning to discuss some of our shared students. They moved through the emptying hallways, their footsteps echoing against rows of blue lockers. Rachel had researched Melissa thoroughly. Brilliant career trajectory at Merck cut short by what official records called a professional disagreement. Unofficial sources suggested she'd blown the whistle on ethical violations in a research trial. "How are you finding Millfield?" Rachel asked as they turned down the science wing. Melissa gave a tight smile. "Everyone's been very welcoming. Small-town hospitality. But not what you expected after Boston. Let's just say the change has been educational." They reached Melissa's classroom, and she balanced her books against her hip to unlock the door. "These shared students you mentioned. Is there a specific concern?" Rachel followed her inside, closing the door behind them. "Zach Martinez." Melissa's expression shifted subtly. "Gifted student. Probably the most talented chemist I've seen at the high school level. He mentioned some concerns about recent lab deliveries." The textbooks hit the desk with a thud. Melissa's posture stiffened as she turned to face Rachel. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Mrs. Morgan." "I'm not implying anything," Rachel said calmly. "I'm directly asking if you've noticed anything unusual about the supplies coming into the restricted lab." Melissa's eyes darted to the door, then the windows. With deliberate movements, she walked to her desk and pressed a button on her phone. Classical music, Bach's Brandenburg concertos, filled the room at a volume just loud enough to obscure conversation from potential listening devices. "You shouldn't be asking these questions," she said quietly, leaning against her desk. "Not if you want to keep your job. Or worse. Then there is something happening." Melissa crossed her arms. "Why do you care? You've been here, what, for months? This isn't your fight." "I've spent my career advocating for students," Rachel replied. "If someone's using this school to manufacture dangerous substances, you don't know what you're up against." Melissa's voice hardened. "Look, I came to St. Michael's for a reason. I know exactly what's happening in that lab because I helped design the original compound while at Merck. It was supposed to be a therapeutic for ADHD, regulated, tested, monitored. Then the company realized its broader applications." Rachel felt her pulse quicken. "Enhancement drugs for academic performance." Melissa nodded grimly. "The perfect market. Stressed students desperate for an edge, parents willing to pay anything for academic success. When I objected to bypassing safety protocols, I was quietly removed. The project officially terminated." Her laugh was bitter, except it wasn't. It went underground, outsourced to independent labs with plausible deniability, like high school chemistry departments. "Exactly. These schools receive grant money, equipment upgrades, even college scholarships for their students. All they have to provide is lab space and discretion." Melissa lowered her voice further. "The compound, they're calling it Clarity now, is being tested in small batches, distributed as vitamin supplements to partner schools, then tracked for efficacy." Rachel felt sick. "They're experimenting on students, with the full knowledge of certain administrators." Melissa's eyes were hard. "This isn't just Thompson. It's a network, school officials, some teachers, even a board member or two. The money's too good to pass up for underfunded districts." "We need to expose this," Rachel insisted. "With what evidence?" "They control the labs, the records, everything." Melissa shook her head. "I took this job to gather proof from the inside, but they watch me constantly. I've barely been able to access the restricted areas." Rachel reached into her bag, withdrawing a folded sheet of paper, a copy of David Jenkins' notes. "What if we had insider information? Chemical formulas, distribution routes, names?" Melissa scanned the document, her eyes widening. "Where did you get this?" "Mrs. Jenkins, the cafeteria worker. Her son was investigating this operation before he died under suspicious circumstances." "The old lady with the German Shepherd?" Melissa looked up sharply. "The dog that keeps barking at Thompson?" Rachel nodded. "Max was her son's detection dog, trained specifically to alert to this compound." Melissa studied the paper more closely. "This is incredible and terrifying. He'd mapped nearly the entire network." She pointed to a molecular diagram. "This is definitely Clarity, but an earlier version. They've modified it since then, made it more potent, more addictive." "Can you identify what they're making now?" "If we had samples, that would be suicide," Melissa interrupted. "These people killed a trained investigator. What do you think they'd do to us?" "They'll keep hurting kids if we do nothing," Rachel argued. "I've already noticed changes in some students. Increased anxiety, sleep disturbances, mood swings. Classic signs of stimulant abuse, but it didn't match typical recreational drug patterns." Melissa paced the classroom, box still swelling around them. If, and this is a massive if, I could analyze a sample, we'd need irrefutable evidence connecting it to Thompson and his operation. Documentation, financial records, witnessed interactions. So we build a case, Rachel said firmly. Carefully, methodically. Between your scientific expertise and my counseling background, we might see patterns others would miss. And Mrs. Jenkins' knowledge of her son's investigation, Melissa added, a reluctant smile forming. 3 women against a criminal network embedded in a respected institution. Sounds like terrible odds. Rachel returned the smile, feeling the first spark of hope since Max's barking had disrupted that March morning. In my experience, Dr. Chun, those who underestimate women often find themselves facing terrible consequences. As they made plans to meet again, neither noticed the shadow that briefly crossed the classroom door's small window, or heard the soft footsteps retreating down the hallway. May transformed St. Michael's campus into an explosion of color. Crimson tulips lined the walkways, dogwoods erupted in white blossoms, and the ancient oak trees unfurled their new leaves against cloudless blue skies. The beauty stood in stark contrast to the mounting tension Rachel felt as she pieced together the puzzle of Thompson's operation. The library had become their sanctuary. Mrs. Alvarez, the 60-year-old librarian with salt and pepper hair always twisted into a severe bun, had initially seemed an unlikely ally, rigid, traditional, and fiercely protective of her book collection. Yet when Rachel had casually inquired about the library's surveillance system, Mrs. Alvarez had smiled thinly and said, "Cameras haven't worked since 2018, dear. Budget cuts. I've been meaning to put up signs to deter the troublemakers. But sometimes privacy is more valuable than prevention." The message was clear. The library was a safe haven. Rachel sat at a back table, surrounded by reference books that provided perfect cover for their true purpose. Mapping delivery schedules, documenting student symptoms, and cross-referencing staff schedules with lab access. Melissa slid into the seat across from her, carefully placing a worn copy of Great Expectations between them. "Anything?" Rachel asked, not looking up from her legal pad. "Thompson met with Peterson during lunch," Melissa murmured, opening the book to reveal a small notebook hidden inside. "They discussed next week's special delivery and something called Phase 2. I couldn't hear everything, but they mentioned expanding the trial group and measurable cognitive enhancement." Rachel frowned. "That matches what I'm seeing in student sessions. The swim team suddenly showing improved focus and endurance, but with concerning side effects. Headaches, insomnia, mood instability. Classic amphetamine-adjacent symptoms," Melissa confirmed. "I checked the training supplement they're given after practice. It's labeled as an amino acid blend, but the color and consistency are suspicious. Could you get a sample?" Melissa shook her head. "Peterson keeps it locked in his office refrigerator. I'd need a reason to be in there alone." She flipped through her notebook. "But I've been tracking Max's reactions around campus. The dog consistently alerts in 3 locations: Thompson's office, the restricted lab, and, this is new, the equipment room behind the gym." Rachel added this to her notes. 3 distribution points. Clever. Spread across campus to avoid drawing attention to any single location. She lowered her voice further. Mrs. Jenkins accessed the school's delivery logs. "The shipments are increasing, double the volume from March. They're scaling up production," Melissa concluded grimly. "But why now? Why the sudden acceleration?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Tyler Watson, a lanky sophomore with an unfortunate cowlick and a reputation for computer brilliance, approached their table with the awkward shuffle of an adolescent uncertain of his welcome. "Mrs. Morgan? Got a second?" His eyes darted nervously to Melissa, then back to Rachel. "Of course, Tyler. This is Dr. Chen from the science department." Tyler nodded acknowledgement. "I, finished that research you asked about. For the, student support program." Rachel had made no such request, but recognized the clumsy code. "Thank you. Would you like to discuss your findings?" The boy glanced around the nearly empty library before sliding a USB drive across the table. "It's all there. The, academic performance tracking you wanted? I cross-referenced it with the, demographic data you mentioned." Rachel pocketed the drive. "This is very helpful. How did your approach work out?" Tyler's face lit up with the enthusiasm of a tech geek given permission to explain his methods. I wrote a script to crawl the school's grade database, purely for academic research purposes, of course. It flagged statistically significant performance jumps across marking periods. Then I correlated those with extracurricular activities, class schedules, and, health center visits. Melissa leaned forward slightly. Clever approach. What were your findings? That's the weird part. Tyler lowered his voice to a whisper. The performance spikes cluster around specific groups, athletes first, then academic competition teams, now expanding into AP classes. But here's the thing. Those same students show a 42% increase in nurse visits for headaches, dizziness, and nausea. Rachel and Melissa exchanged glances. The pattern matched their suspicions perfectly. There's more, Tyler continued. I found some financial stuff too. Weird budget allocations to departments that don't exist. Like, there's a line item for neurocognitive research supplies that gets six-figure funding annually. St. Michael's doesn't have a neuroscience department. How did you access budget records? Rachel asked, impressed despite her concern. Tyler shrugged. I help Mrs. Winters with the digital filing system. She thinks I'm just a tech support kid who makes the computer stop showing the blue screen of death. His expression grew serious. Mrs. Morgan, someone's monitoring student performance like they're collecting data points. Not normal academic tracking. This is pharmaceutical trial-level stuff. Rachel felt a chill despite the warm May afternoon. Tyler, this is important information, but it could also be dangerous knowledge. You need to be careful, like David Jenkins was? Tyler interrupted. At their startled expressions, he continued, his name is in the old files. He accessed the same records before he died. I found his digital footprint in the system. Someone tried to erase it, but they didn't know about server backups. Rachel stared at the boy, reassessing him completely. How long have you been investigating this? Since my brother started taking this special vitamins Coach Peterson gives the swim team. Tyler's voice hardened. Jake's breaking school records, but he doesn't sleep anymore. He gets nosebleeds, crazy mood swings. Last week, he couldn't remember our dog's name. A dog we've had for 8 years. Melissa closed her notebook. Neural degradation. It matches the side effect profile we predicted. Tyler, Rachel said carefully, what you've discovered makes you a valuable ally, but it also puts you at risk. We need to establish strict communication protocols. The boy nodded solemnly. Already handled. I set up an encrypted chat server on a private network. Looks like a gaming forum to anyone monitoring traffic. He handed them each a slip of paper with login credentials. The security uses triple authentication and, Tyler, Melissa interrupted gently. We appreciate the technical details, but perhaps focus on operational security for now. He blushed. Right? Sorry. Main thing is, they're planning something big. There's a calendar entry in Thompson's private schedule for May 30th labeled Phase 2 Implementation. Whatever they're doing, it's happening in 2 weeks. After Tyler left, Rachel and Melissa sat in stunned silence for several moments. A high school sophomore just advanced our investigation more than we have in weeks, Melissa finally said. Rachel nodded, and potentially put himself in the crosshairs. She stared at the USB drive in her hand. We need to accelerate our timeline. 2 weeks isn't much time to build an airtight case. It might be enough if we can get a sample of clarity for analysis, Melissa replied. With Tyler's data and chemical confirmation, we'd have compelling evidence. As they gathered their materials, Rachel caught a glimpse of Principal Thompson through the library window, standing in the courtyard below. He was engaged in conversation with a man she didn't recognize, tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that screamed federal government. Thompson's body language betrayed unusual tension, shoulders rigid, gestures constrained. We have another player on the board, Rachel murmured, nodding toward the window. Melissa followed her gaze. Friend or foe? Unknown, Rachel replied. But in my experience, when people like Thompson get nervous, either something's gone wrong, or something's about to go very right for them, Melissa finished grimly. The last week of May brought unseasonable heat to Millfield, the kind of stifling humidity that turned classrooms into saunas and frayed tempers to breaking points. Air conditioning systems groaned in protest as temperatures climbed into the 90s, their mechanical complaints providing a fitting soundtrack to the mounting tension at St. Michael's. Rachel wiped perspiration from her forehead as she reviewed her notes in the relative cool of the cafeteria's walk-in refrigerator. Mrs. Jenkins stood guard at the door, Max at her side, both vigilant for unexpected visitors. The suit Thompson was talking to, his name is Carter. Federal Inspector for the Department of Education, Mrs. Jenkins reported, her voice hushed despite their secure location. Supposedly here for a routine compliance check, but he's been asking questions about laboratory facilities and chemical storage protocols. Government involvement could complicate things, Rachel mused, flipping through the dossier Tyler had compiled. Either he's part of the operation or someone's finally paying attention to the red flags, Mrs. Jenkins finished. David tried reporting his suspicions to the DA 3 times before his death. Each time, the investigation stalled mysteriously. Rachel studied the elderly woman, noting the deep fatigue etched into the lines of her face. 5 years of serving meals to children while secretly investigating her son's killers had taken its toll. We need to approach Carter carefully. If he's legitimate, he could be our best ally. If not, we've exposed ourselves, Mrs. Jenkins said grimly. She reached down to stroke Max's head. He's getting old, 12 now, ancient for a working dog, but his nose still works perfectly. Her voice caught. David would be proud of him, standing guard all these years. Rachel reached out, squeezing the older woman's shoulder. He'd be proud of you too, Elaine. Most people would have broken under what you've endured. Mrs. Jenkins straightened her cafeteria uniform. Grief either destroys you or forges you into something stronger. I chose the latter. She checked her watch. You should go. The junior class awards ceremony starts in 20 minutes. Thompson expects all faculty to attend. The auditorium hummed with anticipation as students and parents filled the rows of uncomfortable plastic seats. Rachel took her assigned place in the faculty section, noting Melissa's absence with concern. The chemistry teacher had texted earlier about pursuing a lead during the ceremony when the science wing would be largely deserted. Principal Thompson took the stage to enthusiastic applause, his silver mustache perfectly groomed above a practiced smile. His charcoal suit showed no wrinkles despite the heat, his demeanor betraying none of the strain Rachel had observed during his meeting with Inspector Carter. Distinguished guests, faculty, and the exceptional young men and women of St. Michael's Academy, he began, voice resonating with practiced authority. Today we celebrate excellence, the relentless pursuit of achievement that defines our beloved institution. As Thompson continued his speech, Rachel scanned the audience, cataloging faces, relationships, potential allies. In the third row, she spotted Tyler Watson sitting beside a taller boy with similar features, presumably Jake, the swimmer experiencing Clarity's side effects. The brothers couldn't have appeared more different. Tyler alert and wary, constantly scanning his surroundings. Jake glassy-eyed and fidgeting, one leg bouncing uncontrollably beneath his khakis. On the far side of the auditorium stood Inspector Carter, his government-issue suit and ramrod posture making him instantly recognizable. Unlike the parents and students focused on the stage, Carter's attention roamed the room, his expression revealing nothing. A familiar chime from her phone drew Rachel's attention. A message from Melissa appeared on the screen. Storage cabinet. Restricted lab. Proof obtained. Meeting compromised. Be careful. Rachel's pulse quickened. If Melissa had secured a sample of Clarity, they finally had physical evidence to present to authorities. But the warning about a compromised meeting suggested their investigation had been discovered. Thompson's voice continued in the background as Rachel composed a response. Where are you now? No reply came. Rachel slipped from her seat, moving quietly toward the exit. Thompson's eyes tracked her movement briefly before returning to his notes. Once in the hallway, she tried calling Melissa, but the call went straight to voicemail. The science wing lay eerily silent, emergency exit signs casting a reddish glow over the empty corridor. Rachel moved cautiously, listening for any sound that might indicate Melissa's presence, or someone else's. The door to the restricted lab remained locked, its small window dark. Rachel pressed her ear against the cold metal, hearing nothing but the distant hum of ventilation systems. She tried Melissa's classroom next, finding it similarly deserted, though a Bunsen burner still glowed blue on one of the lab tables, evidence of a hasty departure. As Rachel turned to leave, her foot struck something small that skittered across the floor. She knelt to examine it, a flash drive identical to the one Tyler had given them, but with a small green dot marked on its surface. Melissa's system for identifying their most sensitive files. Rachel pocketed the drive and continued her search, unease growing with each empty room. In the faculty lounge, she found Melissa's purse and keys still hanging in her assigned cubby. The chemistry teacher wouldn't have left the building without them. A soft sound from the hallway sent Rachel pressing against the wall behind the door. Footsteps approached, measured, deliberate, too heavy for Melissa's slight frame. Through the narrow gap between door and frame, Rachel glimpsed Inspector Carter moving toward the science wing, phone to his ear. "Area secured," he said quietly. No sign of the subject or the material. Proceeding to secondary location. He paused, listening. "Understood. If recovered, the sample will need immediate analysis. We're dealing with something new here, not just another designer stimulant." Rachel remained motionless until his footsteps faded, mind racing to process this new information. Carter was clearly looking for something, or someone, but was he searching for Melissa to help her or silence her? Her phone vibrated again, this time with a message from an unknown number. "Boiler room. Now. Bring no one. Tell no one. Delete this." The school's boiler room occupied the sub-basement level, a labyrinthine space of pipes, machinery, and shadowed corners that featured prominently in student ghost stories. Rachel descended the metal staircase carefully, each step echoing despite her attempts at silence. "Melissa," she called softly, the sound swallowed by the mechanical drone of ancient heating equipment. A hand shot out from behind a massive water tank, grabbing her arm and pulling her into the shadows. Rachel found herself face to face with Melissa, the chemistry teacher's normally immaculate appearance in disarray. Lab coat, smudged with dirt, a small cut bleeding on her forehead. "Jesus, you scared me," Rachel breathed, relief flooding through her. "They know," Melissa whispered urgently. "Someone accessed my computer while I was extracting the sample. I barely got out before they locked down the lab." "Who?" "Thompson, Peterson, and two men I've never seen before. They were wearing hazmat protocols, full containment gear." Melissa's hands trembled as she reached into her pocket, withdrawing a small vial of clear liquid. "This is it, Rachel. Pure clarity. Enough for a complete analysis." Rachel stared at the innocuous-looking substance. "So this is what they're giving to students? What killed Mrs. Jenkins' son? An earlier version killed David. This is more refined, more potent." Melissa's eyes reflected fear and determination in equal measure. "I managed a preliminary analysis before they interrupted me. It's not just a cognitive enhancer. It's something entirely new. A neural pathway modifier that creates permanent changes to brain architecture." "Permanent?" Rachel echoed, horrified. "What kind of changes?" "Increased synaptic plasticity, enhanced memory formation, accelerated processing, but at catastrophic cost. Brain scans would likely show progressive degradation of the hippocampus and frontal lobe. Long-term use would result in early-onset dementia, personality disintegration, potentially complete neural collapse." Rachel thought of Jake Watson's symptoms: memory issues, mood swings, disconnection. They're destroying these kids' brains for what? Academic performance metrics. "That's just the beginning," Melissa said grimly. "Phase 2 isn't about students at all. The documentation I found suggests they're preparing for wider distribution, targeting corporate executives, military personnel, even government officials. Clarity 2.0 would create a functional cognitive elite with a built-in expiration date, subjects who burn brilliantly before burning out completely." The implications were staggering. "We need to get this to the authorities immediately." "Not just any authorities," Melissa insisted. "This operation has protection at multiple levels. The only safe option is the FBI's Pharmaceutical Crimes Unit in Chicago, specialized agents who handle designer drug cases." A distant metallic clang echoed through the boiler room, followed by the sound of descending footsteps. Melissa gripped Rachel's arm painfully. "Take the sample and the flash drive," she whispered urgently, pressing both items into Rachel's hand. "Go out through the maintenance tunnel. It leads to the athletic fields. I'll create a diversion." "I'm not leaving you here," Rachel protested. "Someone has to deliver the evidence," Melissa insisted. "I have an encrypted backup of everything at my apartment. If we both get caught, everything we've done means nothing." The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by the beam of a flashlight sweeping across the machinery. "Rachel," Melissa said, her voice dropping to a barely audible whisper. Whatever happens, remember, Thompson isn't the top of this pyramid. This goes beyond St. Michael's, beyond Millfield. The money behind this operation comes from somewhere with much deeper pockets. Before Rachel could respond, Melissa pushed her toward a rusted metal door half hidden behind decades of accumulated equipment, then moved in the opposite direction, deliberately creating noise to draw attention away from Rachel's escape route. As Rachel slipped through the maintenance tunnel, the last thing she heard was Melissa's voice, calling out with false bravado. "Inspector Carter? Is that you? Thank God you're here. We need to talk about Principal Thompson." The maintenance tunnel's exit deposited Rachel behind the visitors' bleachers at the far edge of St. Michael's athletic fields. Evening had fallen during her underground journey, the spring sky darkening to indigo as distant thunder promised approaching storms. She crouched in the shadows, brushing dirt from her clothes and assessing her situation. Melissa's sample and flash drive felt impossibly heavy in her pocket, physical evidence of a conspiracy that seemed to grow more vast and dangerous by the hour. If Carter was legitimate, Melissa might already be explaining everything to him. If not, Rachel pushed the thought away, focusing instead on immediate steps. Her car remained in the faculty parking lot, too exposed. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from the school's main office and a text from Tyler. "Alert. Your name on security bulletin. Leave campus now." She needed a secure location to examine the flash drive's contents and formulate a plan. The school's cameras covered most exits, but Tyler had once mentioned a blind spot near the baseball field's equipment shed. Rachel circled behind the bleachers, staying low and using the gathering darkness as cover. The rain began as she reached Old Mill Road, fat droplets quickly becoming a downpour that plastered her clothes to her skin, but provided welcome concealment from passing cars. 2 miles separated her from downtown Millfield and potential sanctuary, but the storm's intensity forced her to seek immediate shelter. The public library had closed at 5, its darkened windows reflecting lightning as Rachel tried the staff in trance on a hunch. Mrs. Alvarez had mentioned that the building's ancient security system had been temperamental since budget cuts, library code for deliberately disabled to allow after-hours access for students who lacked internet at home. The door opened with minimal effort, its alarm silent as Rachel slipped inside. The children's reading room offered both privacy and a computer that wouldn't be connected to the school's network. She booted up the system, inserted Melissa's drive, and opened the first file, a detailed chemical analysis of Clarity accompanied by brain scans labeled with only patient numbers. The technical language exceeded Rachel's scientific knowledge, but the conclusion sections were chillingly clear. Subjects displayed dramatic cognitive enhancement, followed by equally dramatic neural degradation. Melissa had documented everything meticulously, including timestamps correlating specific batches with student test groups. A folder labeled Distribution contained shipping manifests and financial records showing payments flowing through a complex network of shell companies, ultimately leading to an entity called NeuroCrest Innovations. A quick internet search revealed NeuroCrest as a subsidiary of Westlake Pharmaceuticals, one of the largest drug manufacturers in the country with extensive government contracts. "This goes beyond St. Michael's," Melissa had said. The evidence confirmed her warning. Thompson's operation was merely one node in a nationwide network using schools as both production facilities and testing grounds. Rachel downloaded the files to a secure email account, then composed a message to the FBI's Pharmaceutical Crimes Unit, attaching key documents and a brief summary of their findings. Her finger hovered over the send button when her phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. "Rachel? It's Elaine Jenkins." The cafeteria worker's voice sounded strained. "Are you safe? For now? How did you get this number? Tyler set up secure phones for us. Listen carefully. They've discovered everything. Thompson called an emergency meeting with Peterson and that federal inspector. They're searching for you and Dr. Chun." Rachel's grip tightened on the phone. Did they find Melissa? A pause. "She's been taken into custody by Inspector Carter. They're calling it protective detention, pending investigation of unauthorized access to restricted areas." "Is Carter legitimate?" "I don't know," Mrs. Jenkins admitted. But Max reacted to him, not as strongly as to Thompson, but enough to raise suspicion. Rachel processed this information. "I have the evidence, chemical samples, and digital files. I'm preparing to send everything to the FBI. Not from any network they can trace, Mrs. Jenkins warned. Thompson's people are monitoring all communications in and out of Millfield. You need to deliver it personally. Chicago is 3 hours away. I have a better option, Mrs. Jenkins interrupted. My cousin Frank retired from the state police last year. Lives about 40 minutes north in Bedford County. He still has contacts in law enforcement, people we can trust. The library's lights suddenly flickered as another thunderclap shook the building. Through the rain-streaked windows, Rachel spotted headlights turning slowly into the parking lot, a black Cadillac identical to Thompson's. I need to move, she whispered urgently. Text me the address. Rachel shut down the computer, pocketed the flash drive, and moved quickly toward the library's rear exit. As she slipped out into the stormy night, the beam of a flashlight swept the children's section she'd just vacated. The rain had intensified, reducing visibility to mere feet and turning the streets into rushing streams. Rachel kept to backyards and alleyways, moving north toward the town limits. Millfield's small size, normally claustrophobic to someone accustomed to Chicago's vastness, now worked in her favor. Within 20 minutes, she'd reached the edge of town where houses gave way to farmland. A battered pickup truck idled at the crossroads, its headlights off. As Rachel approached cautiously, the passenger window rolled down to reveal Mrs. Jenkins behind the wheel, Max vigilant in the back seat. Get in, the older woman urged. They've set up checkpoints on the main roads out of town. Rachel climbed in, sodden clothes immediately forming a puddle on the truck's worn upholstery. How did you know I'd come this way? Mrs. Jenkins put the truck in gear, proceeding without headlights down a rutted farm access road. Because it's what David would have done. Avoid main arteries, stick to the routes only locals know. Her weathered hands gripped the steering wheel with surprising strength. I've been planning escape routes for 5 years, ever since they took my boy. Never thought I'd be using them for someone else. They drove in silence for several miles, the storm gradually diminishing to a steady drizzle. Rachel's phone showed no service. Whether from the rural location or deliberate interference, she couldn't tell. Tell me about Inspector Carter, she finally said. What's your read on him? Mrs. Jenkins kept her eyes on the unmarked road. Government man, definitely. But whether he's investigating Thompson or supporting him isn't clear. He asked a lot of questions about the school's special programs, faculty backgrounds. And Melissa? Did you see them take her? The older woman's expression tightened. They escorted her from the building during the awards ceremony. No handcuffs, no force, but she wasn't going willingly. Carter kept saying something about decontamination protocols and exposure risks. Rachel's mind raced through possibilities. If clarity is as dangerous as Melissa's research suggests, anyone handling it without proper protection could be at risk. Maybe Carter is actually trying to help her. Or silencing her permanently, Mrs. Jenkins countered grimly. That's how these people operate. If she's exposed to a lethal dose while in custody, they'll call it an unfortunate accident, just like they did with David's drowning. The truck crested a hill, revealing a valley dotted with the lights of a small rural community. Mrs. Jenkins gestured toward a cluster of buildings. Bedford County. Frank's place is on the outskirts. Former sheriff's deputy with a healthy distrust of federal overreach. If anyone can get your evidence to the right people, it's him. As they descended toward the valley, headlights appeared on the road behind them, moving fast, gaining ground with alarming speed. We've got company, Rachel warned, twisting to look through the rain-streaked rear window. Mrs. Jenkins checked the rearview mirror, her expression hardening. Black SUV, government plates. She pressed the accelerator, the truck's ancient engine protesting as they picked up speed. There's a turnoff about a half-mile ahead, logging road that cuts through to Frank's property. They won't know it. The SUV continued gaining, its high beams now illuminating the truck's interior. Rachel clutched the seat as they hit a pothole, the truck momentarily airborne before crashing back to the muddy road. Almost there, Mrs. Jenkins muttered, knuckles white on the steering wheel. The turn is just past that stand of pines. A spotlight suddenly blazed from the pursuing vehicle, bathing them in harsh white light. The SUV's window lowered, revealing a dark shape extending toward them. Get down, Mrs. Jenkins shouted, simultaneously swerving the truck as something whistled past Rachel's window. Are they shooting at us? Rachel gasped, ducking below the dashboard. Worse, Mrs. Jenkins replied grimly. Tranquilizer dart. They want us alive for questioning. The logging road appeared suddenly, little more than a gap between trees marked by a weathered, no trespassing sign. Mrs. Jenkins wrenched the wheel, the truck fishtailing as they left the main road. Branches slapped against the windshield as they plunged into darkness, the narrow path barely visible in the dim dashboard lights. They won't follow us in here, Mrs. Jenkins said confidently. Too easy to get lost without local knowledge. But the SUV's headlights remained visible in the rearview mirror, weaving but persistent on their trail. These aren't local authorities, Rachel realized. They're professionals, someone with resources and training. Mrs. Jenkins' expression was grim as she navigated the increasingly treacherous path. All the more reason to get your evidence to Frank. He'll know who to trust. She glanced at Rachel. No matter what happens, that sample and those files have to reach the right people. Everything, Melissa's safety, justice for David, those kids' lives, depends on it. The road ahead suddenly disappeared, washed away by the storm's fury. Mrs. Jenkins slammed the brakes, the truck sliding sideways before coming to rest mere feet from a churning creek that had overflowed its banks. End of the line, she said grimly, reaching under her seat to withdraw a small revolver. Frank's place is about a half-mile through those woods. Take Max, he knows the way. I'm not leaving you, Rachel protested. Someone has to slow them down, Mrs. Jenkins replied, her voice suddenly gentle. I've been fighting these people for 5 years, Rachel. This was always how it would end. She pressed the truck keys into Rachel's hand. The sample vial is what matters now. Max will guide you. He was trained for this. Behind them, the SUV's headlights grew brighter as it navigated the final bend in the road. The forest enveloped Rachel in absolute darkness, the dense canopy blocking even the faint moonlight that occasionally pierced the storm clouds. She splashed through ankle-deep mud, one hand gripping Max's collar, the other clutching the precious vial and flash drive secured in a waterproof pouch Mrs. Jenkins had pressed into her hands before forcing her from the truck. Northeast bearing, the elderly woman had instructed, voice steady despite the approaching headlights. Cross the second stream, then look for 3 tall pines in a triangle formation. Frank's cabin is just beyond them. Behind her, the confrontation played out in muffled sounds. Car doors slamming, voices shouting commands, Mrs. Jenkins' defiant responses. No gunshots, at least, small comfort as Rachel pushed deeper into the unfamiliar terrain. Max moved with surprising confidence despite his age, tugging her forward when she hesitated at obstacles, choosing paths invisible to her human eyes. The dog's training was evident in his focused determination, a living link to the son Mrs. Jenkins had lost and the justice she still sought. The rain intensified again, drowning out any sounds of pursuit, but rendering the forest floor treacherously slick. Rachel lost her footing on a steep embankment, sliding several yards down a muddy slope before catching herself against a fallen tree. Pain shot through her ankle, not broken, but badly twisted. Max circled back, whining softly as she struggled to stand. I'm okay, boy, she whispered, using a branch as a makeshift cane. We need to keep moving. They crossed the second stream, now a surging torrent that soaked Rachel to her waist, and continued northeast as instructed. The pain in her ankle intensified with each step, but the alternative was unthinkable. If Thompson's people captured her, the evidence would disappear, and with it any hope of exposing the operation and saving the affected students. After what felt like hours, the three-pine formation appeared, sentinel-like against the night sky. Beyond them, a faint light glimmered through the trees, a window or porch lamp marking civilization in the wilderness. Max suddenly stiffened, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Rachel froze, straining to hear over the drumming rain. Footsteps approached from the west, heavy, purposeful, moving with the confidence of someone tracking rather than searching. Rachel ducked behind a massive oak trunk, pulling Max close. Her pursuer moved with professional precision, pausing occasionally to examine the ground before continuing in her direction. A flashlight beam swept the area, momentarily illuminating a familiar figure in a rain-slicked federal windbreaker, Inspector Carter. Mrs. Morgan, he called, voice surprisingly calm. I know you're nearby. The dog's prints are distinctive, even in this weather. Rachel remained motionless, scarcely breathing as the beam passed within inches of her hiding place. "I'm not working with Thompson," Carter continued, moving slowly through the underbrush. "I've been investigating Neurocrest for 18 months. Dr. Chun is safe, in protective custody at the Bedford County Sheriff's Office. It could be a trap, the oldest one in the book. Offer false security, then spring the trap when the target reveals themselves. Your colleague Mrs. Jenkins told me where you were headed before they took her in," Carter added. "She said to tell you Max remembers. Said you'd understand what that means." Rachel glanced down at the German Shepherd pressed against her leg. If Max had been trained to detect specific chemical compounds, he might also react to people associated with those compounds. The dog had alerted to Thompson repeatedly and to Carter more subtly, but was now showing no signs of agitation despite the inspector's proximity. She made her decision. "Over here," she called, stepping cautiously from behind the tree. "But that's far enough until I'm convinced." Carter stopped, lowering his flashlight to avoid blinding her. "Fair enough. You have something we need, evidence of Clarity's chemical composition. I have something you need, federal authority to shut down Thompson's operation. Prove you're legitimate," Rachel demanded, keeping Max between them. Carter slowly reached into his jacket, withdrawing his credentials. "Federal Drug Safety Commission, Pharmaceutical Enforcement Division. We investigate underground drug manufacturing operations, especially those with potential national security implications." Rachel remained skeptical. "I've never heard of your agency." "That's by design," Carter replied. "We operate under deep cover, particularly in cases involving powerful pharmaceutical corporations like Westlake." He took a careful step forward. "Thompson doesn't know my true affiliation. He believes I'm conducting a routine educational compliance review. If you're investigating Neurocrest, why wait until now to act? They've been testing Clarity on students for months." Carter's expression hardened. "Because we needed to identify the entire network, not just one node. St. Michael's is one of 17 schools involved in production and testing. Tonight was supposed to be simple surveillance, but when Dr. Chun extracted a sample and you both fled with evidence, it forced our hand." Rachel studied him, weighing his words against her instincts. "What happened to Mrs. Jenkins?" "Local authorities have her in custody. Thompson's allies on the police force. That's why we need to reach your contact in Bedford County immediately. Once we secure the evidence, my team can move against Thompson with full federal authority." The story was plausible, but something still felt wrong. "If you're not working with Thompson, why did Max react to you at the school?" Carter hesitated, then sighed. "Because I've been handling trace amounts of seized Clarity to maintain my cover. The dog is trained to detect it. Impressive animal, really. Military-grade detection capabilities." Max remained calm, neither alerting nor showing aggression toward Carter, lending credibility to his explanation. "The cabin is just beyond those trees," Rachel said finally, decision made. "But I keep the evidence until I speak directly with Melissa." Carter nodded. "Acceptable terms. Can you walk? Your ankle looks swollen." "I'll manage." The cabin appeared as they crested a small rise, a sturdy structure of logs and stone with a covered porch where an older man stood watching their approach, shotgun resting casually against his shoulder. "That's far enough," he called as they reached the clearing. "Identify yourselves." "Frank Jenkins?" Rachel called back. "Elaine sent us. I'm Rachel Morgan from St. Michael's Academy." The man's posture remained wary. "And your companion?" "Inspector Carter, Federal Drug Safety Commission," Carter replied, again producing his credentials. Frank descended the porch steps, shotgun still at the ready. The family resemblance to Mrs. Jenkins was evident in his weathered face and piercing blue eyes, though his frame was more substantial, suggesting a lifetime of physical work. "My cousin mentioned a chemistry teacher," he said, gaze shifting between them. "Asian woman. Where is she?" "Supposedly in protective custody at the Bedford County Sheriff's Office," Rachel answered before Carter could speak. "That's what the inspector claims, anyway." Frank's expression revealed nothing as he studied Carter. Bedford County Sheriff's Office closed 2 hours ago on account of the storm. Power's out across the Eastern District. Rachel felt Max tense beside her as Carter's demeanor subtly shifted. "Perhaps a different facility then," Carter said smoothly. "My team handles the logistics of protective custody." Frank's grip on the shotgun tightened. "Interesting. I had a 30-year career with Bedford County law enforcement. Know every facility within 50 miles. And I've never heard of no Federal Drug Safety Commission. The atmosphere changed in an instant. Carter's hand moved toward his jacket as Frank raised the shotgun to his shoulder. "Don't," Frank warned. "Whatever you're reaching for stays where it is." Carter froze, then slowly raised his hands. "You're making a mistake. I'm a federal agent conducting a legitimate investigation." "Maybe so," Frank replied. "But federal agents know better than to lie about local facilities." "Mrs. Morgan, step away from him, please." Rachel moved toward the porch, Max following protectively. As she reached the steps, Carter suddenly lunged, drawing a concealed weapon from his ankle holster. "The evidence, now," he shouted, training the pistol on Rachel. Frank fired a warning shot that splintered the porch railing inches from Carter's head. "Next one won't miss, son." Carter's face contorted with rage as he kept his weapon steady. "You have no idea what you're interfering with. This goes beyond your comprehension, beyond all of you. Clarity is the future of human cognitive evolution. You're one of them," Rachel realized, the final pieces clicking into place. "Not investigating NeuroCrest, working for them. Securing their interests," Carter corrected coldly. "Do you think something this valuable would be left to a high school principal to oversee? Thompson is just a production manager. I ensure the operation remains uncompromised." "By eliminating threats," Rachel said. "Like David Jenkins. Like you plan to do with Melissa and me." Carter's smile was chilling. Dr. Chun proved surprisingly resilient to interrogation. "You, however, will tell me exactly where you've hidden the sample and all copies of the research data." Max growled, sensing the escalating tension. Rachel's mind raced, calculating angles, distances, possible scenarios, none favorable, while Carter's weapon remained trained on her. "The evidence is in my pocket," she said carefully. "I'll give it to you if you answer one question honestly." Carter's expression betrayed impatience. "Ask, how many students have died from Clarity's side effects? Not just at St. Michael's, across all 17 schools." Something flickered across Carter's face. Not remorse, but annoyance at being questioned. "Acceptable losses in pursuit of breakthrough science. Each version improves the safety profile." "That's not an answer," Rachel pressed. "How many kids, Carter?" 23 confirmed cases of terminal neural degradation," he stated clinically. "Another 41 with permanent cognitive impairment. The current formulation is significantly safer." Frank's knuckles whitened on the shotgun. "You experimented on children. We advanced human potential," Carter snapped. "The subjects were carefully selected, expendable individuals from underperforming demographic groups. Their contributions to science far exceed whatever mediocre futures awaited them." Rachel felt physically ill at his casual dehumanization of the victims. "You're a monster." "I'm a visionary," Carter corrected. "Now the evidence." Slowly, Rachel reached into her pocket, withdrawing the waterproof pouch containing the vial and flash drive. As Carter extended his hand, a blur of golden fur launched from beside Rachel. Max, unleashing years of training in one explosive movement. The German Shepherd struck Carter's arm with precision, clamping powerful jaws on his wrist. The gun discharged harmlessly into the ground as man and dog tumbled into the mud. Frank moved with surprising speed for his age, closing the distance and delivering a decisive blow with the shotgun, but that rendered Carter unconscious. "David taught that dog good," Frank said grimly, securing Carter's weapon and producing zip ties from his pocket. "Let's get inside before more of his friends show up." The cabin's interior was warm and surprisingly modern, a stark contrast to its rustic exterior. Frank secured Carter to a heavy chair, then disappeared into a back room, returning with first aid supplies for Rachel's ankle and a satellite phone immune to conventional signal blocking. "Elaine said you had evidence that needed to reach the right authorities," he said, nodding toward the pouch Rachel still clutched. "Chemical samples and documentation of illegal drug manufacturing and testing on minors," Rachel confirmed. "But I don't know who to trust." Carter claimed to be federal law enforcement, obviously a lie. Frank's weathered face creased in thought. "I've got one contact who might help. Former FBI agent who specialized in pharmaceutical crimes before retiring. Man of absolute integrity. But he'll need compelling evidence to re-engage with active law enforcement." Rachel held up the pouch. "Will this be enough? Let's find out." Frank activated the satellite phone, dialing a number from memory. "Jim? Frank Jenkins. Sorry to wake you. But we've got a situation involving that pharmaceutical case you worked 5 years ago, the one that got shut down from above. He listened for a moment. Yeah, that's the one. I've got someone here with physical evidence and documentation, and an unconscious federal imposter who's admitted to 23 student deaths. Another pause. Understood. We'll be ready. He ended the call, turning to Rachel with the first genuine smile she'd seen on his face. Jim's coming with a team he trusts implicitly. ETA 90 minutes, weather permitting. Until then, we fortify and prepare. Thompson and his people will have figured out Carter's mission failed by now. Rachel settled into a chair, finally allowing herself to acknowledge the exhaustion seeping through her body. Max patted over, resting his graying muzzle on her knee. Good boy, she whispered, stroking his damp fur. The very best boy. Frank handed her a steaming mug of coffee. My cousin said you've only been at that school a few months. Most people would have kept their heads down, minded their own business. Rachel sipped the strong black coffee, warmth spreading through her chilled body. I tried that once before in Chicago. Saw warning signs, waited too long to act. A student died. She met Frank's steady gaze. I promised myself never again. Outside, the storm continued to rage, a fitting backdrop to the conflict still unfolding. But within the cabin's solid walls, with evidence secured and help approaching, Rachel felt something she hadn't experienced since that first day when Max's barking had disrupted the peaceful morning. Hope. The storm abated sometime before dawn, clouds dispersing to reveal a sky transitioning from black to deep indigo. Rachel stood on Frank's porch, watching the forest emerge from darkness, first as shadowy outlines, then gradually gaining color and definition as daylight strengthened. Her body ached from the previous night's ordeal, but her mind remained alert, processing the dramatic shift in her circumstances. Inside the cabin, a coordinated federal operation was taking shape. Jim Reynolds, Frank's FBI contact, had arrived with a 4-person team specializing in pharmaceutical crimes and corruption cases. Their unmarked vehicles were positioned strategically around the property, communications equipment established in Frank's living room, and Carter secured in a reinforced transport vehicle under armed guard. The sample of clarity had been carefully packaged for laboratory analysis, while Melissa's flash drive was being examined by a technical specialist who maintained a running commentary of shocked expletives as she explored its contents. This is beyond anything we've seen before, Reynolds told Rachel as they watched the sun crest the eastern hills. In his mid-60s, with silver hair and penetrating gray eyes, he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to managing complex investigations. 17 schools across 6 states, all operating as production and testing facilities for an experimental cognitive enhancer. The scope is unprecedented. And the authorities never noticed? Rachel asked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Reynolds sighed heavily. We noticed. 3 years ago, a DEA investigation identified unusual chemical shipments to educational facilities. David Jenkins was one of their informants. He glanced at her. But the investigation was shut down from above, political pressure from someone with significant influence. Westlake Pharmaceuticals, Rachel guessed. Their CEO sits on presidential advisory committees, funds campaigns on both sides of the aisle, and controls a pharmaceutical empire worth billions. Reynolds' expression hardened. But this evidence changes everything. 23 dead students, documented human experimentation without consent. Not even Westlake can survive that level of criminal liability. Frank emerged from the cabin, satellite phone in hand. Just got word from the sheriff's department. They've located Elaine. She's shaken but unharmed. And Melissa? Rachel asked anxiously. No sign of her at any official facility, Frank replied grimly. But one of the deputies reported unusual activity at the old Westlake Research Facility outside Millfield. It was supposedly decommissioned years ago, but there have been vehicles coming and going all night. Reynolds immediately turned to his team. Sarah, get satellite imagery of that facility. John, coordinate with local tactical units for potential breach scenarios. We move on confirmation. Rachel felt a renewed surge of urgency. Thompson will be destroying evidence as we speak. Not if he doesn't know we're coming, Reynolds countered. As far as he's aware, Carter is still pursuing you, and the evidence hasn't reached authorities. We have a narrow window of opportunity if we move fast enough. The FBI team operated with practiced efficiency, transforming Frank's cabin into an impromptu command center. Maps of Millfield appeared on digital displays, personnel assignments were distributed, and communications protocols established. Rachel watched with growing appreciation for the professionalism unfolding before her. "We'll need you to identify key players once we're on site," Reynolds told her. "You and Mrs. Jenkins are our primary witnesses connecting Thompson to the operation." A young agent approached with a tablet displaying satellite imagery. "Sir, we've got heat signatures at the Westlake facility. Approximately 20 individuals concentrated in the main building and what appears to be a loading operation in progress at the rear entrance." Reynolds studied the image intently. "They're evacuating, probably relocating the entire operation." He turned to Rachel. "Did Dr. Chen mention any contingency plans Thompson might have? Secondary locations, emergency protocols?" Rachel considered the question. She said Clarity 2.0 was being prepared for wider distribution, military and corporate applications. If they're evacuating, they'll prioritize the latest research and production equipment. "Which means Dr. Chun herself," Frank interjected. "She designed the original compound. She's more valuable to them than any equipment or documentation." The realization hit Rachel with terrible clarity. They're not going to kill her. They're going to force her to continue the research elsewhere. Reynolds immediately began issuing orders, his team responding with coordinated precision. Within minutes, vehicles were being prepared, tactical gear distributed, and the operation timetable accelerated. "You'll remain here with protection," Reynolds told Rachel firmly. "You've done your part. Now let us do ours." "With all due respect, you need me," Rachel countered. "I know the players, the facility layout, and most importantly, I can recognize signs of Clarity production that your agents might miss. Plus, Melissa trusts me. If she's being held against her will, seeing a familiar face could prevent a dangerous situation from escalating." Reynolds studied her with professional assessment. "This isn't your first rodeo, is it, Mrs. Morgan?" "Chicago Public Schools Crisis Intervention Team," Rachel replied. 5 years dealing with gang violence, drug distribution, and systemic corruption. I'm not just a school counselor. I specialized in identifying and dismantling exploitation networks targeting vulnerable students." A flicker of respect crossed Reynolds' face. "That explains why Thompson couldn't intimidate you." After a moment's consideration, he nodded. "You can accompany the second team, observation only, following orders without question." "Clear. Crystal." As preparations continued, Max padded over to Rachel, sensing her tension. She knelt beside the aging German shepherd, running her hands through his golden coat now dried and brushed by one of the agents who'd taken a liking to him. "You've done your part, old friend," she murmured. "Time for you to rest while we finish this." Frank approached, shotgun replaced by a more practical sidearm holstered under his jacket. "He's coming with us," he said simply. "David trained him for exactly this kind of operation. Besides, that dog's earned the right to see this through." Rachel couldn't argue with the sentiment. Mrs. Jenkins would agree. The convoy departed 30 minutes later, 4 unmarked vehicles moving at precisely the speed limit toward Millfield. Rachel rode in the second vehicle with Reynolds, Frank, and Max, using the journey to brief them on St. Michael's layout and key personnel. "Thompson's the operational manager, but Peterson from the chemistry department handles the actual production," she explained. "There's at least 2 board members involved, possibly more. The money flows through a complex network of shell companies back to Neurocrest, Westlake's development subsidiary." Reynolds nodded, making notes. "And the students? How were test subjects selected?" "Athletic teams first, then academic competition participants, anyone whose performance could be measured objectively. They disguised Clarity as nutritional supplements, energy drinks, even candy distributed through the cafeteria." Rachel's voice hardened. The kids had no idea they were being experimented on. When side effects appeared, they were attributed to stress, overwork, or normal teenage issues, making Mrs. Jenkins' position in the cafeteria particularly valuable for monitoring distribution, Reynolds observed. "No wonder they've tolerated her presence despite suspecting her motives." The Westlake Research Facility appeared ahead, a sprawling complex of low buildings surrounded by a perimeter fence topped with razor wire. Despite its supposedly decommissioned status, the parking lot contained several vehicles, including Thompson's distinctive black Cadillac. Reynolds' team established a perimeter, drone surveillance confirming 23 individuals inside, most concentrated in what building plans identified as the main laboratory. Thermal imaging showed one person isolated in a secure room, likely under guard. "That's probably Melissa," Rachel said, studying the display. "If they're evacuating, they'll move her last. She's too valuable to risk losing in transit." The operation unfolded with textbook precision. FBI tactical teams secured the perimeter while local law enforcement established roadblocks on surrounding access routes. Rachel, Frank, and Max remained in the command vehicle, monitoring communications as the first teams breached the facility. Primary entrance secured. Proceeding to main laboratory, came the clipped report. Multiple subjects detained. No resistance encountered. Minutes later, Thompson in custody. Repeat, primary target secured. Evidence of chemical production throughout facility. Hazmat team required for safe processing. Rachel leaned forward as Reynolds coordinated the operation. Anxiety building as no mention of Melissa came through the communications. The isolated heat signature remained stationary in the secure room, but approaching teams reported the area locked down with electronic security beyond their immediate capabilities. "We need the access codes," Reynolds decided. "Bring Thompson to the command vehicle." Principal Thompson looked nothing like the polished authority figure Rachel had confronted in his office. His silver hair was disheveled, his expensive suit rumpled, and his characteristic confidence replaced by barely concealed panic as agents escorted him to their position. "Edward Thompson," Reynolds began formally, "you're under arrest for illegal drug manufacturing, criminal conspiracy, human experimentation without consent, and 23 counts of negligent homicide. The evidence against you is comprehensive and irrefutable." Thompson's gaze flicked to Rachel, recognition and hatred flashing across his features. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," he snarled. "This research represents the future of human cognitive enhancement. Save it for your trial," Reynolds replied coldly. "We need the access codes for the secure laboratory. Dr. Melissa Chun is being held there." "I want immunity," Thompson demanded. "Full protection and a new identity." "That's not how this works," Reynolds said. "But cooperation now will be noted in sentencing recommendations." Thompson's expression calculated possibilities, weighing options rapidly diminishing with each passing minute. "The secure lab requires both an access code and biometric authentication. I can provide both, but I want assurances." "The only assurance you get is that we won't add obstruction of justice to your charges," Reynolds stated flatly. "Every minute you delay puts Dr. Chun at greater risk." Thompson's facade finally cracked. "Fine. The access code is 479,621 Alpha Tango. My thumbprint is required for final verification." Reynolds immediately relayed the information to the tactical team. Rachel watched the thermal imaging display, breath held as the isolated figure finally moved, approaching the entry point where agents now waited. "Dr. Chin secured," came the report minutes later. "Medical attention required, but condition stable. Repeat, asset secure and alive." Relief flooded through Rachel as the operation shifted to evidence collection and processing of detained suspects. Reynolds dispatched her with a medical team to meet Melissa as she was escorted from the building. The chemistry teacher appeared pale and disoriented, a bruise darkening her left cheekbone and an insertion point visible on her arm. When she saw Rachel, her eyes filled with tears. "You did it," she whispered as paramedics helped her onto a gurney. "You actually got the evidence out." "We did it," Rachel corrected, gripping her hand. "All of us together." Melissa's gaze shifted to Max, who stood alert beside Rachel. A small smile crossed her face. David Jenkins would be proud. His mother too. "Is she safe?" "She's fine." Already talking about testifying against Thompson. As paramedics prepared to transport Melissa to the hospital, she clutched Rachel's arm. "There's something you need to know. They weren't just manufacturing clarity here. They were developing the next version. Neural pathway modification with permanent effects. Military applications." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "And they've already shipped the first batches for field testing." Rachel immediately relayed this information to Reynolds, who expanded the search parameters to include shipping records and destination data. What they discovered transformed an already significant case into something far more extensive. Evidence of Clarity shipments to military research facilities, corporate wellness programs, and even government efficiency initiatives. This isn't just about St. Michael's anymore, Reynolds said grimly as they surveyed the expanding investigation. This is national security territory now. As the sun climbed higher over the Westlake facility, Rachel stood beside Frank and Max, watching the systematic dismantling of Thompson's operation. Evidence bags accumulated, detained conspirators were processed, and the full scope of the Clarity program gradually emerged from years of secrecy. What happens now? Rachel asked quietly. Now comes the hard part, Reynolds replied. Building a case that can withstand the political and financial pressure Westlake will bring to bear. Protecting witnesses like you, Dr. Chun, and Mrs. Jenkins. And most importantly, identifying and treating every student affected by Clarity before the damage becomes permanent. Rachel thought of Zach Martinez and his brother Jake, of the swim team members showing cognitive decline, of all the students unwittingly used as test subjects in Thompson's twisted experiment. Whatever it takes, she said firmly. These kids deserve justice. Max pressed against her leg, his mission accomplished but his vigilance undiminished. In the Golden Shepherd's steadfast presence, Rachel found perfect symbolism for the investigation itself. Persistence, loyalty, and an unwavering commitment to protecting the vulnerable. The fight was far from over, but as morning fully claimed the sky, one truth stood undeniable. The darkness that had enveloped St. Michael's Academy was finally yielding to light. October painted Millfield in rich autumn colors. Maple trees blazing scarlet against azure skies. Golden cornfields rustling in the crisp breeze. Pumpkins dotting front porches throughout the small community. 6 months had passed since the raid on the Westlake facility. 6 months of investigations, depositions, and gradual healing for a town shaken to its foundations. Rachel stood at the edge of St. Michael's newly renovated courtyard, watching students gather for the fall festival, a tradition suspended during Thompson's administration but now restored under new leadership. The school itself had undergone both physical and administrative transformation. Walls repainted, contaminated laboratories completely rebuilt, and most importantly, a new governance structure with transparent oversight. Quite a difference from last year, remarked Superintendent Harriet Collins, approaching with the confident stride that had quickly become her trademark. At 57, Collins had been coaxed out of retirement to shepherd St. Michael's through its recovery, her sterling reputation in educational administration making her the perfect choice for rebuilding trust. The students seemed to be adjusting well, Rachel observed, nodding toward a group of seniors helping younger children with pumpkin carving activities. Thanks in large part to your counseling program, Collins replied. The trauma-informed approach has made a real difference, especially for those still recovering from Clarity exposure. The Clarity Rehabilitation Initiative had become Rachel's primary focus, developing therapeutic protocols for students experiencing withdrawal and neurological effects from the compound. Working alongside specialists from Johns Hopkins and the CDC, she had helped create a treatment program now being implemented nationwide at all 17 schools identified in the investigation. Jake Watson's latest scans showed significant improvement, Rachel said, spotting the swimmer among a group of athletes setting up game booths. The neural regeneration treatments are working better than we initially hoped. The treatments, ironically developed from Melissa Chen's research, represented perhaps the only positive outcome from the entire ordeal. Once freed from Westlake's pressure to develop enhancement drugs, Melissa had redirected her considerable expertise toward healing the damage Clarity had caused. Speaking of Dr. Chun, her congressional testimony made quite an impression yesterday, Collins commented. The live stream had record viewership for a pharmaceutical oversight hearing. Rachel smiled, remembering Melissa's poised but devastating account of Westlake's criminal enterprise. Dressed in a simple blue suit, the chemistry teacher had systematically demolished the corporation's denials with scientific precision, presenting evidence so compelling that 3 executives had invoked the Fifth Amendment before questioning concluded. Any update on the military contracts? Rachel asked, lowering her voice despite the festival's cheerful clamor providing natural privacy. Collins' expression turned serious. Reynolds called this morning. The Secretary of Defense has suspended all neuropharmaceutical enhancement programs, pending complete review. The President is expected to announce an executive order establishing new ethical guidelines for cognitive research. It was more progress than Rachel had dared hope for when they'd first discovered the full extent of Clarity's distribution. The investigation had expanded far beyond Millfield, revealing connections to power brokers in Washington, Silicon Valley, and international pharmaceutical conglomerates. 7 Westlake executives now faced federal charges, with Thompson turning state's evidence in exchange for sentencing considerations. Mrs. M. Zach Martinez called, jogging across the courtyard. Now a freshman at Michigan State's chemistry program, he had returned for the weekend to support his brother and visit his former teachers. The memorial's ready whenever you want to start. Rachel nodded, her throat tightening slightly. I'll gather everyone. The David Jenkins Memorial Garden occupied what had once been the restricted laboratory, a transformation from site of corruption to place of reflection. Stone pathways wound through native plantings, with benches positioned for contemplation and a central fountain whose gentle sounds masked the distant festival noise. Mrs. Jenkins stood beside the covered bronze plaque, her cafeteria uniform replaced by a simple blue dress, her weathered face betraying complex emotions. Beside her, Frank maintained a protective presence, his hand occasionally squeezing his cousin's shoulder in silent support. Max lay at their feet, his golden coat now heavily streaked with gray, his vigilant eyes surveying the gathering crowd. Reynolds arrived last, accompanied by several agents who had participated in the raid. Though the investigation continued across multiple jurisdictions, he had made a point of attending today's ceremony, recognition of where it all began. Thank you all for coming. Rachel began once the small crowd had assembled. Students, faculty, parents, and investigators stood together in the autumn sunlight, united by shared experience. Today we dedicate this garden to David Jenkins, whose courage and sacrifice ultimately protected countless young people from harm. Mrs. Jenkins stepped forward, her voice stronger than her slight frame might suggest. My son believed in justice above all else. When he discovered what was happening at St. Michael's and other schools, he could have looked away. He could have protected himself. Her eyes glistened but remained focused. Instead, he chose to stand for truth, whatever the cost. She pulled the covering from the plaque, revealing the inscription, David Jenkins Memorial Garden, for those who protect the vulnerable, who seek truth in darkness, and who inspire others to continue their work. 2025 Melissa joined Mrs. Jenkins at the plaque, the two women embracing briefly, united by their connection to David and their shared determination to expose the truth he had died defending. I never met David, Melissa said, addressing the gathering. But his work provided the foundation for everything we uncovered. The notes he left behind saved lives and prevented Clarity from reaching even more victims. She gestured toward the students present. Because of him, these young people will recover. Because of him, this school is once again a place of authentic learning rather than exploitation. Reynolds spoke next, his official demeanor softened by evident emotion. The Jenkins case represents both a failure and a triumph of our justice system. The failure came when David's initial reports went uninvestigated, when powerful interests blocked the truth from emerging. The triumph came through the persistence of ordinary citizens who refused to be silenced. He turned to Rachel, Frank, and Mrs. Jenkins. When we talk about courage in law enforcement, we often focus on dramatic moments. But true courage is what these individuals demonstrated. The sustained commitment to justice despite intimidation, despite risks to their safety and livelihoods. This case was solved not by federal agencies, but by a school counselor, a cafeteria worker, a retired deputy, and a chemistry teacher who saw a wrong and decided to make it right. After the ceremony concluded, Rachel found herself alone in the garden, processing the day's emotions. The investigation had consumed her life for months, leaving little time for reflection. Now, with justice progressing and the school healing, she could finally consider her own path forward. Penny for your thoughts? Melissa asked, approaching with 2 cups of cider from the festival. Rachel accepted the warm beverage gratefully, just thinking about what comes next. The Bradford School District in Chicago has offered me a position developing trauma-informed counseling programs. The FBI's Victim Services Division also reached out about consulting work. Both would be lucky to have you, Melissa said sincerely. What about you? Will you stay at St. Michael's? Melissa shook her head. Johns Hopkins offered me a research position developing therapeutic applications from my earlier work. A chance to use the same science that created clarity to heal rather than harm. She smiled slightly. Plus, there's something appealing about Baltimore after everything that happened here. Fresh starts have their merits, Rachel agreed. Though Millfield will always be significant for both of us. They sipped their cider in companionable silence, watching festival-goers pass by the garden entrance. Many paused to read the plaque or simply stand in quiet acknowledgement of what had occurred and been overcome. Tyler Watson approached with his brother Jake, both nodding respectfully as they entered the garden. Jake's recovery exemplified both the damage Clarity had caused and the resilience of its young victims. Though still experiencing occasional memory issues, he had regained most cognitive functions and was now helping other affected students as a peer counselor. Jake's leading a support group for the younger kids, Tyler explained proudly. They relate to him better than to the doctors. That's how healing works, Rachel replied. Those who've walked the path guide others through it. As afternoon mellowed toward evening, the festival lights came on, strings of golden bulbs illuminating the courtyard as darkness gathered. Rachel made her final rounds, saying goodbye to students, colleagues, and the community that had become an unexpected chapter in her life. Mrs. Jenkins and Frank waited by her car, Max between them on a new leash. All packed up? Frank asked, nodding toward Rachel's sedan filled with personal belongings from her office and apartment. Just about, Rachel replied. The Chicago apartment is ready whenever I am. Mrs. Jenkins stepped forward, pressing something into Rachel's hand, a small medallion bearing a German Shepherd's profile. David had these made for his K-9 unit, she explained. Said it reminded them who the real heroes were. Her faded blue eyes held Rachel's gaze. Max and I are staying with Frank now. It's time I left the cafeteria behind. Focus on the trial and whatever time I have left. Rachel closed her fingers around the medallion. I'll keep this with me. A reminder. You know, Frank said thoughtfully, when Elaine first told me about the new counselor asking questions, I figured you'd either get yourself fired or give up within a month. Most people do when they bump against systems that powerful. I'm not most people, Rachel replied with a small smile. No, you certainly aren't. Frank extended his hand. World needs more stubborn troublemakers like you. As Rachel prepared to leave, Max approached her one final time, pressing his graying muzzle against her hand in silent farewell. She knelt to embrace the dog who had started it all with his persistent barking on that March morning that now seemed a lifetime ago. Good boy, she whispered against his fur. The very best boy. The drive out of Millfield took Rachel past now familiar landmarks. The library where she'd examined the flash drive, the road to Frank's cabin where they'd captured Carter, and finally St. Michael's itself, its renovated buildings glowing warmly in the gathering dusk. She slowed, taking in the sight of students and families enjoying the festival, their laughter carrying through her open window. Principal Thompson had wanted to preserve the school's reputation at any cost, even as he poisoned it from within. But institutions weren't merely their buildings or traditions or carefully cultivated images. They were the people who inhabited them, who shaped their true character through daily choices between expedience and principle, between silence and speaking out. As Rachel accelerated toward the highway and the next chapter of her journey, she carried with her not just evidence and testimonies, but deeper certainties. That systems could be changed by determined individuals, that corruption, however entrenched, remained vulnerable to persistent light, and that the quiet heroism of those who protected the vulnerable represented humanity at its finest. The medal from David Jenkins caught the last rays of sunset as it dangled from her rearview mirror, a perfect symbol of the path behind and the road ahead. Different missions, perhaps, but the same unwavering purpose. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and if you watched all the way through, comment "I watched the whole thing" and share your thoughts about this story. Oh, and don't forget to check out the next video that appears on the end screen. It's really exciting.